Hello and welcome to my channel, Nick Loading In. If you are someone who was following me from the beginning, I apologize that I just disappeared for like 3 months. I had a lot going on in my personal life that just I wasn't able to dedicate time and focus onto creating content. A lot of stuff going on in my personal life that was eating up my time and focus, and so I still maintain my research and everything nonetheless, but just wasn't able to get videos out, so I apologize for that. My channel really did start from this Ruby and Jody Hildebrandt case. That case sucked me in when it first broke, and I just decided that it was time to start my channel. It's something that I was mulling over for a long time, and then just the deep dive I took into that case, it really sparked everything for me. And I know I was kind of going down a different rabbit hole, and I'm still going down that rabbit hole, and I still want to expand and pick up where I left off with all of those things. But obviously, in the wake of all the evidence becoming public now for the Ruby and Jody case, as it kind of winds down, and we're waiting to hear what their sentencing ultimately will be from the parole board in Utah. The evidence that the videos, the body cam videos, the interview videos, the jail calls, all of that, the journals, holy crap. So it was, obviously with all that stuff coming out, there was a lot of like ding, 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 like all these connections started being made. These dots started to have a visual line of connection, or there was a lot of information that seemed to support the stuff that I had theorized before, speculated towards in the past with some of my old videos, specifically the Core 6 video I did, the connections within connections. If you're interested, go back. I'll put it in the link down below, but also go back and look. It's like the best performing video that I had. I took a real deep dive into these connections people, specifically really a big focus on the Hannahs and the Frankies and their kind of involvement and relationship. And a lot of the evidence actually gave me a little bit more of an understanding and really did just paint a clearer picture of that timeline. And so today's video, I'm going to be kind of focusing more on that. I'm not trying to take away from the severity of the reality that these kids were living, and now that we really have as graphic and as difficult as it is to receive that information, to know the reality of these kids, we now know. And it's horrific. It's absolutely just disgusting. And I know that a lot of people can't even wrap their mind around or fathom being a parent allowing this type of stuff to go on. We will end up touching a little bit into that area of things as far as the culpability of Ruby and her mental state, and the culpability of Jody and the culpability of Kevin, right? Like these people, there's a lot of questions for them. A lot of people can't understand how they could even get to this point. So I want to touch on that a little bit from my perspective on everything as well. So yeah, that's what we're going to kind of be breaking down in today's video. I'm happy to be back, and I'm excited to get into this. So before we do, though, let me go ahead and get this disclaimer out of the way. Everything that's in this video is my opinion, my speculation, my perspective, my research. I strongly encourage everybody go do their own research and formulate their own opinions, and please, please, please do so respectfully. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. All right, so as we get into this, I'm going to start with Kevin Franke's second interview audio with the police. I want to start with kind of the timeline, like I said, like where these connections, like I theorized before, were ultimately made. My timeline was maybe a little bit off, but realistically, looking back, it was pretty spot on, according to Kevin's recount of how Jody infiltrated their lives. So as we get into all of this, I want everybody to kind of keep in mind that and to me, it's absolutely necessary to consider the religious beliefs and backgrounds of these people. Um, in my opinion, the propensity for Mormon culture to cultivate this kind of like authoritarian outlook on things, or holier than thou type attitude, just really, I feel like there's very few religions that do that better than Mormons. And again, this is based off of just everything that I've been specifically researching. Really, the only comparable religious sects out there would be like the more extremist of them. Evangelicals can be a little bit tough. I have a whole video of my background just kind of being raised more on the evangelical side. I've researching Mormonism and like the FLDS side of it, and everything like that has led me into like the IFB and the kind of the real extreme Baptist side of things. So, but those are more extreme, considerably culty kind of religions. And so for me, I just feel like it's very important to consider that, because the desire for Mormon believers to maintain this kind of clean reputation and stay sacred and pure, and emulate the Savior as much as possible. I mean, that's really like embedded in Mormon culture. And I just feel like that becomes a very difficult thing to keep in alignment when you're raising children, especially in this millennium. So yeah, I just kind of want to highlight that, because I do think it's really important to keep that in consideration. When you believe something so thoroughly, like I've always been told, there's two things you can't argue, there's two things you can't debate, and that's religion and that's politics. And I just feel like when somebody has beliefs that are so deeply rooted for them, see, you get a lot of these really extreme kind of religious sects, and they have like this leader, or these people, this hierarchy, especially in Mormonism, where they are holier than thou. They have a closer relationship or connection to God. They're supposed to be super insightful and have all this wisdom and knowledge that goes beyond their human form in a way. And so when you get somebody who has skewed the word of God, especially in most all of these cases, and they are of a position of power, they can get a skewed message to the people, and then the truth becomes lost. And you see it. I mean, look at the Valo and Daybell. I mean, this has this kind of seeing the interviews and everything really mirrors a lot of that. And so, yeah, I sorry to go on a tangent, but that is, it's just, please try to consider that, keep it in mind as we go through all of this. I'm not trying to take away culpability at all. And at the end of the day, they're adults, they're responsible and accountable for their own actions, choices, decisions, 100%. But I don't think it's fair to just completely like erase the influence and the impact that's here, especially when it comes to Jody Hildebrand, because this woman has an unbelievable track record with manipulating thousands and thousands of people, and being a part of huge platforms like Tom Harrison's platform and Eternal Core, and which all of these people are all connected to this Visions of Glory background. And as we get into this, I feel like it's just continually proving further the thread of connection here to everything else. But again, that's tangenting off into another topic we'll probably touch on again very soon. But that's why I just think it's important. Okay, so Kevin's second interview with police, they ask him about his relationship with Jodi, how'd she become a part of their life, and all of that. And he kind of starts the timeline off in 2018, and some of it's a little bit blocked out, like no sound. When he does come back in to speaking and you can hear him, he does mention that, like, something about finding that in today's world, good luck, that's going to be hard or something. I can only speculate here, but based off of just my knowledge, I feel like it has something to do with finding some type of help or therapy or something for the family. My speculation is, at this time, her two oldest kids are growing up. They're becoming adults. I can just gather from Chad's personality that his personality was probably very difficult for Ruby. It was probably a stark contrast to hers. And so as he got into those teen years, he probably became pretty difficult, especially if you're trying to keep this squeaky clean little reputation as a Mormon family. I can see Chad being a wild one, kind of, pushing those boundaries a little bit more than they would like, I think, as a family, or especially Ruby, which, I do think that Ruby was and just very uptight person, if you know what I mean. And so, anyways, I just speculate that she was having a hard time. I want to single out Chad a little bit in that. And I think she was trying to find some type of, like, kind of God-centric therapy, really, which is odd, but I mean, it's the best way to describe it. And so I think that's where Kevin's like, well, good luck in this, you can't really mix religion with therapy. There's some pretty strict guidelines when you're licensed. So I think that comes back to, again, Jodi sidestepping some of that with her coaching side of things. But anyways, when he does continue to speak, he says that Ruby had a really good friend, Paige Hannah. Well, we already know a little bit about Paige, again, previous videos, but Paige at the time was a massive fan of Jodi's, and apparently Connections as well, as she was basically like one of the faces of Connections at the time.
I would describe myself as socially anxious, somewhat depressed, and an introvert. I really labeled myself as those things because it seemed fitting. I didn't like going out. I didn't like going and talking with others. I got overwhelmed with my role as a mother and with my marriage, and I just didn't know where to go. This is what things looked like pre-Connections. You come home from work, but you don't come home from work because you're still answering emails. And then the time I do have with you, we're in bed, and you're like, oh, hey, it's good to see you. I'm going to be on my phone in bed. And then you wake up, and you're like, oh, hey, where's my best friend? Oh, my phone's right here. And then you're on your phone all day, all the time. You don't even care about any of us. You only care about that. It felt like this state of confusion where I could tell something was off, or I could tell I wasn't feeling right, and I didn't know where to go with it. This is what it looks like post-Connections. Same circumstance, same place, different vocabulary, different tools, different principles. Hey, I just wanted to let you know that when you're on your phone, it hits my fear that my needs don't matter. And that's why I've been so upset and so aggressive about you being on your phone. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I know that you being on your phone doesn't affect my needs mattering. And I'm just going to let you know, if you're on it, I'm going to go make sure that I'm taking care of me and not focusing on you. And you may or may not feel the distance between us, but it is going to be there because you're choosing a connection with your phone over choosing connection with me. Since then, and being a part of the Connections program, I have picked up tools and principles that have helped me along the way to really gain a sense of self. What I learned is that peace can happen within me. All I needed was the tools to get me going. Everyone needs to start somewhere. Start with me in St. George this January, where you can learn the same principles and get yourself to a place of peace.
So considering there's something going on with Ruby at the time, it seems like she's trying to seek some help with on the therapeutic side of things with the family. And it sounds to me like here comes Paige, and she tells Ruby about Jodi, because next thing that Kevin says is by the end of 2018 into 2019, Ruby begins speaking with Jody. And part of what Kevin says is also kind of redacted here, but because he continues to say that Jody would oddly like want to just communicate with the parents first as opposed to like the patient. Like she didn't really get to know the patient. She was focused on the parents, and he thought that was weird because it is. But I guess what he says is that her approach was kind of like you can't fix your kid or help your kid until you help yourself and fix yourself. And so it kind of made sense when she put it that way, is the way that Kevin kind of makes it seem. And so in June of 2019, Kevin states that Jody meets with Chad specifically. So this is also kind of why I'm speculating that it was about Chad, trying to find some therapy for him and helping curtail some of the teenage rebelliousness that goes on with every teenager. They meet, or Jody meets with Chad specifically over Zoom while the family is over on the East Coast, I guess, on some vacation. I tried to go back and find what specific vacation that was. Couldn't really find any of the old footage. I would have to dig even further. And Kevin states also by that point, Ruby and Jody were communicating frequently, either by phone or by Zoom. From all that I can gather here, Ruby had only hired Jody in the therapy or therapist capacity, and maybe it was for the whole kids, because I like all the kids and not just Chad, but maybe there was some more specific attention to Chad. Again, there's still some questions there, of course, but I just feel like maybe there was also an involvement with the family as a whole, because Sherry does talk about there being therapy in one of her podcasts. I'll try to pull that link out from my archives as well. Anyways, at this time, it seems as though that's the only capacity that Jody is operating within their lives, is through the therapy side of things. But by fall of 2019, Kevin says that the Hannahs are kind of trying to get them involved with Jody's other program, Connections, which we all know is more related towards marital, or in some regards, I guess, addiction, assistance, more adult focused kind of a group. So the Hannahs, I think, ended up inviting at least Ruby. I think Ruby extends the invite to Kevin, just the way that he says it, whatever. But they end up attending a seminar or a conference in Thanksgiving Point in Lehigh in the fall of 2019. Kevin estimates there's probably about 100 people there, and upon his first impression, Kevin expresses that he was like, what is this shit? Like, this is crazy, you know? Like, these women are just like man-hating women that are trying to find different ways to break down their husbands. Like, that's pretty much verbatim what he says. And so, yeah, he thinks it's ridiculous. But as I mentioned in my previous video, the Core Six, there's a section with Stephen Barry speaking, which is the other couple that I kind of declared were the big faces, along with the Frankies and the Hannahs, that were really promoting Connections at the time. And though I did mention in that video as well, the Barrys, like, involvement publicly wasn't as publicized, I guess, as the Frankies or the Hannahs. The fact that Stephen Barry is like a well-known practitioner in his area, he says it in his little speech, and the fact that he got up there and spoke, like, that's impactful, that influences people. They're gonna listen. You have a reputation, you've got a good reputation, people think highly of you, respect you. So when you are speaking on something like this, it may convince people to kind of ignore their first thought of like, what? And Kevin kind of alludes to that. His people that he knew and respected, especially the Hannahs and stuff, were getting up there and giving their testimonies. And he was like conflicted and confused because he's hearing from these people and they're all involved, and apparently their lives were saved and changed, and their marriage was changed and saved, and I don't know. I guess I could just understand that being a struggle, and maybe that being a portion of why it was something that he decided to overlook ultimately. He goes on to say that October of 2019 is when they took that trip. Also mentioned before, the Hannahs and the Frankies go over to the UK and they do this whole trip through their heritage and their lineage and all this shit, and it's very much like structured around connections and their teachings and all that. But the Hannahs are also kind of a part of this heritage kind of like, I don't know, group or something. There's a video of Paige Hannah talking about this whole trip.
Another thing I wanted to talk about it. I love how open you are with sharing about the mental health aspect of it, sharing what your own family's doing. I loved following along back, I want to say it was October, November for Roots Tech London, where you went with Ruby Frank to the UK to help her uncover her roots, her startup story. We would love to hear a little bit more about that and what that was like.
Oh, absolutely. So that trip, so my husband and I took Ruby and Kevin Franke to London first for Roots Tech, and then we went up through a few cities in England and then up to Scotland, over to Ireland and home. And along the way, we taught Kevin and Ruby different stories about their lines. And this couple did not have any passion, any desire to do family history whatsoever. It was just so funny because they didn't know that much about where they came from, aside from the little things that their family had told them. And
Triple Kevin in the police interview describes it as like it being very, very obvious that it was like all intended to convince him to join into Connections. So all of this combined ultimately leads Kevin to joining into a men's group in January of 2020 is what he says. And originally it sounds like the agreement was that he was going to do a 3 months like little part of this program within the men's group. And then he'll go on to describe the men's group.
And that's what it was. That's what it felt like. I mean, there were probably 10 men in there. It was on Zoom. All of them were like working through, various stages of like sex addiction, porn addiction, drug addiction, and it was just it was like a 12-step group, but intended just for general like addiction recovery. And I really was like, what the hell am I doing here? Like, I don't belong here. But everyone's like, no, come here. Like, you can learn to have a better like life and a better marriage. And so I thought, okay, whatever. I went through my 3, obligatory 3 months, and I was ready to leave. And then I got challenged to sit down and have a vulnerable conversation with my wife and ask her how my lustful choices have affected her. And, to me, that was like a loaded question. I thought, I still didn't see what I had done or anything that would constitute any form of like, abuse or anything like that. And but I did. I took the challenge and I sat down, and for 2 hours, Ruby very emotionally just shared how she felt in our marriage and how the things that I, over 20 years of marriage, asking for sex as a husband frequently, or asking her to wear lingerie or things like that, how that made her feel. And it was really emotional, and it touched me. Like, I didn't realize that she felt so strongly about that she felt so hurt by that. And so I committed that I would really give it a go. And I stayed in the men's group. And so, in that men's group, I met with Jody every week, with the other men that were in the group. And then it got weird because like our marriage felt like it was getting better and stronger. So this was now, summer and fall of 2020. And in addition to that, there was the whole YouTube cancel thing. I don't know how much you guys are even interested or aware of that, but basically burned down like our YouTube channel. Overnight, like the income went, we lost 90% of the income overnight, and that was hard. So at that time, Ruby was really distraught, and she was looking for support. She was looking for someone who would understand her, who would validate her, and she found that in Jody. All the stuff she did with Chad was because of Jody, and so
really quick side note on this. I've been doing some research as well on the troubled teen industry, and all of these behavioral programs and these residential treatment centers for troubled teens in the wake of the program dropping on Netflix. If you haven't watched it, please go watch it. It is probably a tough watch, but again, awareness. People need to be looking at this. But fun fact, Utah is actually the epicenter for these places. And having covered this case and learning about Chad and his whole experience, having to go to Anasazi and watching his whole video when he came back and the amount of time that he was out there, I've definitely been wondering if there is any overlap with Jody. And I don't know, this kind of seems to help corroborate that, even if very minimally. This does kind of allude to the fact that with what Kevin said, everything that Ruby did with Chad was at the direction of Jody. So for me, I'm going to assume or speculate that she was the one that referred the Frankies to Anasazi and this program. Anasazi's in Arizona, so let's also just keep that in mind. Kind of also seemed a little bit too coincidental for me. And then there's all the research that I have been doing and the things that I have found in regards to the troubled teen industry and the overlap of some of these people. There will be a video soon enough, I assure you. And again, this is just my speculation, but I just had to drop that in here really quick because it's been on my mind. But moving on. At the end of this 3-month experience in the men's group, Kevin's pretty much like, thanks, but no thanks, is how it comes across, I think it probably has a lot to do with the fact that, like, Adam Paul Steed, he was like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't have these types of issues like these other participants, and I probably just felt really, really out of place. But then he gets challenged to have this conversation, a vulnerable, deep conversation with his wife, surrounding what sounds to be like their intimacy and the things, like, from the husband's side, asking for, like, just, I don't know, they're flipping married, and that doesn't give any one person the right to another person by any means, but, like, at the same time, they have their own dynamics, and if they've been married for 20 plus years and they're happy, and we don't really know the inner workings of their marriage prior to everything being put on display publicly with this Jody situation, of course, but yeah, like he says, it's like a loaded question. Like, I definitely don't feel like I've done anything like abusive, but apparently Ruby confides in him the things that she has felt uncomfortable with or that really hurt her, I guess. And in Kevin's case, he's really impacted by this conversation. He listens to Ruby and he's really touched by what she has to say, and he tries to take heed to what she's saying. And this is where I really believe that this is all part of, like, Jody's strategy, almost. I feel like it's why people end up getting sucked in. See, Jody, the wife, seems to always be kind of like this pawn in Jody's little game. And it's a pawn that she ends up wielding almost as like a weapon, She pits the wife against their husbands, and then she guilts the husbands into submission, and then continues to put, like, all this power in the wife's hands, and starts creating this division, starts stretching intimacy, almost vilifying intimacy, actually. And I don't know if that's something, like, I feel like that Jody has some weird issues with sex. And I feel like it's more than just, like, LDS based. I feel like there's something else that's going on there. People have speculated on her actual orientation. I don't know. I can't really elaborate it on much more than that or explain it any further than that, but there's just this feeling that I get when because of how all of her material is based and all of the ways she's treated like most of the men that have ever come to her group. It's weird. It's weird to me how she vilifies that, and she strips that away from the marriage. Which, like, if your whole program is based off of connecting and connections, that just seems a little counterintuitive to me. I don't know, let me know what you all think. But anyways, let's circle back to Kevin's conversation with Ruby and how it impacted him, and yeah. And ultimately what that, to me, sounds like convinced him to like commit to giving this program a shot. So, like, okay, fine. He goes ahead and he commits that he will really buy into this program and he'll really give it a shot, basically. And so basically the way that Kevin kind of describes it is that by this point as well, he's starting to notice better things within his marriage, better connection. Even though there's less intimacy, there's more like emotional connection he's feeling. And he thinks, things are presumably getting better for him. And then the whole 8 passengers drama thing kind of blew up in May 2020. And it was around that beanbag video for Chad. And so they kind of, he basically says their YouTube channel like burned down overnight, and they lost 90% of their income at the time. And Ruby was super distraught and having a really hard time with it. And so she turned to Jody, naturally, he says, for some support. And in doing that, it probably just propelled them into being more and more involved with connections as well as a couple. And he's probably trying to be more supportive because she's going through a hard time. And so by fall of 2020, which is, I think it was like around September or so, that I thought I remembered seeing like their first picture of them as a couple, as like a keynote speaker at some conference or something. So they start becoming speakers, giving their own testimonials. He'd stand up there. I was the guy who thought this was a crock of shit, but now it's changed my life. I'm seeing the impact in my marriage, And he says things would pretty much continue on that way for quite some time. At least, a few months into March of 2021. And then this is when Kevin says shit starts getting weird with Jody. So, March of 2021, they all have this conference. I think he said it was in the St. George area. I can't remember. But after this conference in March, and there's several pictures from it on the Connections Facebook page, which is still up, but the Connections website is been taken down, which I thought is interesting. But there's all these pictures of that, what I believe to be that particular conference and everything. Well, after that conference, I guess they kind of more like internal group or what have you, the kind of the mental fitness trainers that were being trained, and the more dominant inner circle, as Kevin would say, gets together and goes and has dinner. Well, at this dinner, apparently Jody opens up to the women in a private conversation, is what he says, and basically confides in them that she feels like she's being tormented and in all this shit by shadow figures. Where does that sound familiar? We'll get to that. But she she has this private conversation, confides in them about this kind of very creepy, in a way, experiences that she's having. Well, Kevin says it's not even like a couple days later, Jody and the Hannahs meet up, and from Kevin's description of it, the Hannahs were involved with some other gal that is doing some of the similar things that Jody's doing with her Connections program, and that the Hannahs were hoping to merge these two.
All I know is at some point within a couple days of that, in that month of March, the Hannahs drove down from Mapleton and picked Jody up and brought her back to their home in Mapleton, and she lived for 6 weeks in that home in Mapleton. And this is where, like, I don't know what happened, but I do know that there's two different sides of stories. They tried to introduce her to a new cult lady that the Hannahs were getting into, so they wanted to merge their cults into one, apparently. And
they referred to it as a cult at the time?
Oh, no. No one in a cult says, I'm in a cult.
Right. That's what I was wondering. But from your perspective, it looks like two cult leaders merging together.
From where I stand now, absolutely.
As I was doing my research and trying to see how these fingers kind of extend out into the rest of the world, what other coaching kind of structures or programs were popping up that were similar, and if there was any connection to the people that were involved in Connections. Because around March 2021, I also noticed that, like, the Hannahs and the Berries and those prominent people kind of disappeared, and then it's slowly, like, the mental fitness trainers shit kind of tapered off as well. Like, you didn't see anything about it, and then it just becomes like Ruby and Jody, and that's like it. There's a few other people that were like part of the background in the men's group, but then she's kind of like starts cycling through these random couples that will speak at certain conferences, but there's nothing consistent, nothing like what it was with that core six, right? My theory as to who this cult lady, as Kevin describes her, was that the Hannahs were so intent on introducing Jody to, and according again to Kevin, with the intent of like merging their programs essentially. So when I first started doing my research on the Connections crew and like those mental fitness trainers and that kind of era, while I was looking into that, I found this other lady that seemed to have a lot of interactions primarily with members of that core six, Paige and Johnny Hanna and Becky Berry. And then I also noticed some other familiar faces. Liz Jaggy, who was a part of Connections at one point. Michelle Haskett, I think is how you would say that. She's in this little clip with this lady as well. And so I remember during my research stumbling upon this and kind of going and checking out her page, and I noticed that she was also doing this life coach type shit. And as I looked through her material, it was so very obviously similar to Jody's stuff. And I remember at the time just thinking it was really kind of interesting, that overlap, and kind of questioning what had happened there. I did kind of speculate that maybe this was where that like transference of people happened, where they left Connections and went over there. But I didn't have any reason for that until listening to Kevin's interview. And so upon hearing that, I was like, holy shit, this has got to be the person that they were trying to introduce. Because again, Becky Berry and Paige Hanna, Becky Berry especially, I did stumble across an old photo of her with this lady, and it back from 2016. So this relationship was before anything that I found connecting these people to Connections. So anyways, the person that I stumbled across is this lady named Christy Reeves, and she has this whole thing, Coaching with Christy. And again, yeah, her material is very much in alignment with Connections. But then again, it looks like this was kind of where all these people ended up. They seem to have left Connections and gone over to her stuff. All right, so when I heard Kevin talking about this, immediately I went back to the research that I had been doing and how it led me to this Christy girl. And I, at the time, obviously when I stumbled upon this, I had no idea how this all connected or was related to anything, if at all. But this to me just put the pieces together. I strongly believe that the Hannahs were trying to introduce Jody with Christy and trying to make this merger happen. And so I went back and I took a look at Christy's website. She's got this podcast and everything. She's still very much so active. Absolutely. I think a podcast came out like a week or so ago, sometime this month. And she's got several. She's been going on. I think she started back in like 2023 with the podcast. And if you go through all of the episodes, several people are listed several times that were in connections with Jody. So when I went back and I looked at it after, it's been 5 months or so, her website has definitely had a makeover. It's definitely had some updates, but in the materials she posted, I feel like more materials directly, like worksheets and all this shit directly on her website. You can get the PDFs and download them directly for there. It looks like for free. But the verbiage and the materials are so similar to Jody. It's almost creepy in a way. Now, from my understanding, Paige did express at some point to somebody, and I don't remember where I heard this or found this, but that she wasn't involved in connections anymore. She didn't agree with some of the more extreme tactics or methods that were happening in that group. But ultimately, from my understanding, she believed in some of the foundations that were being taught there. And so I feel like this just shows that she kind of, after that whole event and fiasco that we'll get into eventually here, back in March of 2021, they just made their exit and started being involved with Christy from there. And from what I can see, so far what I found is Christy's teachings and program is a little bit more mild as far as how it operates in comparison to Jody's. But I do want to say this, and I've been on the soapbox before, and I'll probably be on it again and again and again. These people are not life coaches. They operate way too much in the past, and they're confusing their role as a coach. I have other videos on it. I've gone over the difference between a coach, a mentor, and a therapist, and all of this. These coaching models that these particular people are creating and developing, they overstep the role of coaching, in my opinion. And when you've got people basing their whole model off of kind of like this religious, God-centric, Christ-like idea, I feel like it becomes very dangerous. And especially what I've noticed is a big pattern within this demographic. And when I say this demographic, I'm talking about primarily Utah, because this is where all this stuff seems to be happening, and Utah is essentially ran by the LDS church. So all these LDS members and people who are trying to create this God-centric mental health care and programs and all of this shit, it's dangerous. It's so dangerous, because they're wielding the scripture and these situations and the way that they view things that are overall pretty ridiculous to them. I mean, you can't drink coffee. You can't, you're not supposed to self-please. You're not, it's insane. And what I've noticed a lot is that there's a lot of LDS therapists who have been getting in trouble with the board because they're licensed and they have oversight and they have some complaints from their clients. And a lot of the times there's a lot of extremism going on in these therapists' tactics and things. And what I've noticed is they're getting slaps on the wrist, they're getting license suspended or whatever. If they get in trouble, they just rebrand their organization into some life coaching thing. And until Utah changes, and I hope that they are on the right path with it in the light of all this shit with Jody, until they change the regulations, there's no oversight there, and there's nothing that says you can't mix religion into your program and be very forthright with it at that as well. Like, you know, with therapy, you can't be the one to initiate anything based off of religion. You could get in serious trouble. Even Tom Harrison has said that openly in a podcast of his on Eternal Core. And so, yeah, I just, this whole, even if Christy is mild compared to Jody or whatever, I still find that there is false advertising in a way, as well as the potential to become very, very dangerous. It puts a therapist has all the power, technically, right? People are coming to them sharing vulnerable things, and so they need to be regulated for the protection of the client and for the protection of themselves, right? So why wouldn't it be any different for these situations if you're basically doing the same thing, but you're operating under life coaching with no licensing oversight or board to check on you? That's what I'm, you know? And so when you have a power struggle like that in a relationship, which coaching should never be a power struggle relationship. In fact, the client should always have all the power. But this is where it becomes dangerous. It becomes dangerous. You have people coming in there sharing intimate things, opening up to you about very personal, private things in their life, and as a life coach, that is not your responsibility. That is a therapist's responsibility. So again, I'm sorry to go on a tangent and I'll get off my soapbox now, but these people are not life coaches, and there's always going to be that potential for it to overstep and become a problem. And as we have seen, it could be a very, very, very dangerous slippery slope. Anyways, so let's circle back. It does appear that this event between the Hannahs and Jody in March of 2021 into April of 2021 was kind of the thing that blew everything up for Jody and her mental fitness trainers, and this whole expansion to connections that was taking place at the time. Like I said, it was very weird to me that all these people just kind of disappeared. All these people that were prominent figures on connections were gone very quickly without any information. And then all of a sudden you've got everybody stripped away, and it's just Ruby and Jody, and it's like, wait, what happened, right? And so now I feel like we have our answer, and again, I feel like all roads led to this person. And when I don't know if this meeting ever actually took place. It's never confirmed or not, but we do know that a couple days like after the discussion of the meeting, or maybe it was after the conference or something, the Hannahs go down and pick up Jody and bring her to their house to live for 6 weeks. Bunch of crazy shit happens there. If Jody had known about Christy and knew about the meeting or any of that from the Hannah side, I believe that Jody felt threatened. And I'm going to get into that and all of that in my next video. I'm doing this in 2 parts because there's just so much information, so I wanted to break it apart and make it a little bit more digestible. And so that will be coming out here in just a short bit, but I'm going to round this one off and leave it here, and we'll jump into why I think Jody felt threatened, and why I think everything that happens from this moment forward is embellishing upon Jody's grandiose ideas of herself. So keep a lookout for part 2. I am going to try to get that out ASAP. I'm hoping for tonight, but I still have to put some stuff together and kind of edit some stuff. So hoping by tomorrow at the latest. And like I said, I'm going to continue to go into a little bit more why I think that Jody's behavior following this supposed like meet or merger meeting type thing embellishes upon her grandiose ideas of herself. But also I want to expand some more on the money, the move, and definitely my thoughts on the pen papers. So yeah, keep a lookout for that. Thank you for tuning in on this one. Look forward to the feedback and what people think, and yeah,